So this is a question I've gotten a lot over the last couple of days since our direct mail vendors mailed out Q1 results, kind of looking at that, and is how does this compare to last year? And that's a perfectly reasonable question. The problem is this year we changed vendors. And while we can look at appeal by appeal to see how did Christmas appeal last year compared to Christmas appeal this year, really the comparison isn't a valid comparison. Any two vendors are going to have a different strategy. So for example, our prior vendor had a different strategy where they mailed deeper in Thanksgiving, where our current strategy is a less deep in Thanksgiving, deeper in Christmas. Our prior vendor would have done during the Christmas follow-up, there would be a split list where part of them got a newsletter, part of them got a standard appeal based on selection. This year we didn't do that. It was just a simple follow-up email. Last year, the vendor had a much heavier dependence on year-end giving, and so that year-end giving was backed up and actually had a follow-up. So there were actually 2 year-end appeals, which would have hit prior to the Christmas period, which would then absorb some of that revenue. So all of that goes to say you really can't compare year over year by appeals. The reason is if you mail deeper into the file for one segment or another segment, you're going to find that generally speaking, the average gift goes down and the response rate goes down. The shallower into the file you go, so the ones most likely to make the gifts, you're going to increase your average giving and they're going to increase your response rate. So there isn't really a point of comparison when you change strategy like that. Not to mention you're changing appeals, appeal structure, and appeal timing. Now, all of that applies regardless of where we are throughout the year, but is most pronounced in Q1 when we do the very most of our mailing, even though thematically they're the same, right? You have Thanksgiving, you have Christmas, you have year end. Thematically they're the same, but the strategy behind them vary markedly. The other major element that you're going to see when you're changing vendors, especially as we change this year, is a budget limitation or a budget restriction or a budget change. That really is most pronounced in the acquisition element of it. So how much did they spend in acquisition? How much were they allowed to spend? What did they do? What were those results look like? That's going to have a dramatic effect. So the larger your budget, the more you're spending, the more donors you're typically going to bring on, but also the lower response rate and the lower average gift because you're bringing more and more donors on. You're going deeper into that acquisition list. You're getting to the less qualified potential donors. So it's a change in strategy and a change in budget. So this is true year round. It doesn't matter when we do it. It doesn't matter from year to year to year to year. But this year, more than any other year, you have the added struggle of it's a COVID year. And so none of our results have been what I would consider a standard result. Some appeals doing far better than normal. Others are about where we expect them to be in an average year. And some appeals haven't done what we would have expected them to do outside of a COVID year. We've seen new donors come on throughout the entire year, completely out of the norm for standard Salvation Army. We normally only acquire donors during Q1. We've seen a far greater increase in online giving than we would have normally seen. We saw an increase in white mail in most places outside of area commands. So we're seeing this dramatic shift in how our donors are giving to the Salvation Army. All of it tied to what we're doing and how we're responding to COVID and how society is responding to COVID. So the simple question is, can we compare this year over year? The answer is no, not really. And this year, more than any other, it isn't a realistic expectation. So then the question is, how do I judge this year? If I were to pick a number and say, what would I do to be able to compare this year to last year? I would look at the entire period. I would say, okay, when I switch vendors, I can look at Q1, so October 1 to December 31st, all gifts that are in that period, and compare income and expense to that. So I'm looking at the net revenue. That would be the closest you could get to how to 1 year compare to another. Even that has its struggles, but that's the closest you can do if you really want to compare one period to another, is to look at the entire quarter and say, okay, the strategy for the quarter varied, but it was your best strategy for a quarter. So how did we do? Now this year, because of mail delays, because of some CDS processing delays that are associated with the mail delays, you need to wait a little bit longer to do that analysis. But that, if you're going to do it, that would be the one I would do. I would look at what did Q1 do as a whole and not look at any one appeal, because frankly, that just gives you a false sense of either failure or success, depending on which side you're looking at. All right, so hope that helps. If you have any other questions, let me know. I'll be happy to get those answered. Take care.